Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special, and this week, very Australian guest, Mr. Professor, correct me, mate, Professor Ian Plimer, fresh over from Oz, speaking at the House of Lords. Morning.
Good morning, James.
We go back a long way, don't we, mate?
Bit too far.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't changed. But since I last saw you, one of our close friends and comrades in the Great Climate Wars has died, Bob Carter. Let's talk about him first, because he was a great man, wasn't he?
He was a great man. I first met Bob when we worked together on the Australian Research Council, and he was a tiger. He was a tiger for the scientific method, he was a tiger for validation of results, and he was also very generous, because some of those people who criticised him later were those who Bob championed strongly for to get research grants. He was a great man, and he was a very independent thinker, which of course is not what you want in universities today. You want people in their uniforms and saluting and following the crowd. And Bob was one of the old style university people who was a great communicator, who had a huge amount of knowledge, and who was very, very independent. And that's what he was paid to do, and the university didn't like it.
What was Bob's speciality?
His speciality was paleontology, from which he was able to look at sea level changes, climate changes, rates of evolution, rates of sedimentation. It was an absolutely perfect appointment for James Cook University of North Queensland, which specialises in the Great Barrier Reef. And when Bob was first appointed, I was then the professor at Newcastle, and I wondered, what the hell are they appointing a bloke like this for? James Cook University does a lot of work on mineral deposits. Maybe they should get someone from mineral deposits. But Bob very quickly showed he was a great leader, and he was able to integrate information from all different areas such that the understanding of the Great Barrier Reef was very different from those of the catastrophists who were going to tell us we're all going to fry and die and the barrier reef was going to go. And Bob had studied ancient reefs, and in ancient reefs you see that they die, they come back again, they die, they come back again, and when they die it's because sea level fell or the land level rose. It was never due to warmer climates. It was because of the sea level going down, not up.
I have to say that in the last 5 years, it seems to me as though the Great Barrier Reef has pretty much supplanted the polar bear as the poster child of the we're all doomed and it's all our fault movement.
Oh, very much so, but the greatest damage to the Great Barrier Reef is done by tourists going out there fishing and having a look at it. The Great Barrier Reef hasn't been there for very long. It's come and gone many times. Every time you have a glaciation and sea level falls, the Great Barrier Reef disappears. Every time it rises, it appears again. And the coral moves northwards. We still have corals in Papua New Guinea. We have corals in Vanuatu. And these like it warm. They like areas where we've got high carbon dioxide. And there's areas where we have corals, such as in the Red Sea, where corals thrive in water much, much warmer than the Great Barrier Reef. Reefs also get wiped out by cyclonic activity, which stirs up sediment and covers them, and they come back. Reefs also, for only 3,500 million years, have been attacked by predators, and we see that in the fossil record, and they survive. So what we're seeing in the Great Barrier Reef is a normal turnover of destruction of parts of the reef, and it grows back again. That is nothing special.
I do quite like having a scientist on my programme, because one of the many things I'm accused of by the climate alarmists is that I'm anti-science and I don't know anything about science. But hey, I contract out all the sciencey stuff to people like you. Now, you can answer one of the questions that really puzzles me about the whole barrier reef thing. How come there are so many experts, and I use the term advisedly, attached to universities like James Cook Universities, these guys who study the reef? How come they make all these statements about how the reef is dying? I mean, aren't they supposed to be scientists? Aren't they supposed to stick to facts?
Well, the first point about you not being a scientist, you don't have to be a scientist to see that human-induced global warming is a scam. All you've got to do is to use some logic and think about the scientific method, how we collect data, interpret that data, and that's got to be validated and in accord with pre-existing data. And if that doesn't happen, then it's not science. Now, this is what's happening in the global warming scam. And it is a scam because many of the universities, such as James Cook University of North Queensland and Queensland University, are following the money. This has got nothing to do with the Great Barrier Reef. It's about whether you can put bread and wine on your table from generous research grants by frightening people witless. Now, if you can possibly show that there's a relationship between ingrown toenails and climate change, you will get a research grant. And the Great Barrier Reef is a perfect poster child because no matter where you go, you can see damage to the reef. This is what happens normally at reefs. At the front of the reef, you get broken off reef detritus. At the back of the reef, you get a reef sediment that's been stirred up and stirred up and stirred up as fine sediment. You see that on every reef. So you've only got to take one shot and a few seconds of a clip and you can say, oh, the reef is dying. Well, the reef is thousands of kilometres long. It's one of many reefs in the world. And reefs we've had on planet Earth for only 3,500 million years. They have come, they have gone, and every time we see them go, it's when it's got colder or we've had a massive sedimentation on top of the reef, especially from volcanic detritus. So the Barrier Reef is a wonderful poster child. It's full of colour, it supports the tourist industry, there's critters there that you can kiss, and it's a wonderful thing to screw the taxpayer to keep you in a comfortable life doing research work which is absolutely, totally useless.
But do you think that the people who become marine biologists, is it that they get brainwashed at the university and then go on to do their doctorates and then go on to promulgate this lie? Or do they actually believe this stuff?
Well, I think they get brainwashed a lot earlier. The first thing that kids learn in science today is how evil and terrible we humans are and how we're destroying the one and only planet that we live on. Years ago, the first thing you got taught about in school was photosynthesis and how carbon dioxide is the food of life, and without carbon dioxide we all die. But we don't hear that now. We hear that carbon dioxide is a poisonous gas and it's a pollution. And of course, once you're inculcated with those views, life then goes on to where reefs, which are absolutely dependent upon carbon dioxide, a reef has 44% carbon dioxide in it by weight, these biologists then do not look at the chemistry, they look at these beautiful little critters and they make their whole career out of following their hobby and insisting that the taxpayer pays for their hobby. And so these people are very, very much committed to continuing the work. The word believe that you used is a word of religion and politics. It's not a word of science. And the fact that these people have a belief in global warming is showing that it's a new puritanical religion tied into the taxpayer supporting this religion.
Yeah. I wonder whether what's happened to science is analogous to what's happened to my own subject, English literature. I was looking at some articles written in the 1950s about Byron, about Evelyn Waugh, and about Milton and so on. And they were written by people who were interested in English literature, and they were asking probably the fundamental question we should all ask when studying a subject like that, which is this person worth reading? Why are they worth reading? What separates them from the other people who are less good or better than them? Just basic questions. And I've noticed what's happened in the way that English literature is taught now, where it's sort of disappeared up its own fundament, really, where the questions have become narrower and more politicised. Feminism has crept in, Marxism has crept in, so that what was once a subject which was studied for its own intrinsic beauty now becomes yet another branch of cultural Marxism. And in the same way, I was thinking, you think about all the great scientists, the great naturalists, the people who went and formed the collections in the British Museum, Hans Sloane, for example, the great collector, or even later people like Charles Darwin. They were going out there to look at nature and observe and enjoy the fish and the birds and stuff. But you can't do that anymore. Now it has to be loaded. You can't go out to the Barrier Reef and just study pretty fish and look at them and their habits. It has to be loaded with the question, what does this have to do with us and our fault? Is that a correct analysis?
Well, yes, but I'd like to add to that a little bit. as a science student at university, we were forced to do a course in English literature. And that was a fabulous course because that was the only course in my science degree where I was taught how to be a critical thinker and how to analyse and how to actually read something and try to interpret it. We also had to do a course in philosophy, and that course was fundamental to me asking the question in science all the time is, how do we know what we know? And that is absolutely fundamental, where you can have an independent thought, where you're not polluted by any finance for your research, and you go in there with an open mind. We had a third subject we could pick, and that was of choice, and I picked Counterpoint. I've always had an interest in music, and in Counterpoint I came to the realisation that our Western culture, which has counterpoint, is far superior to other cultures, and it's expressed as counterpoint and layering in music. And you don't get that in Indian music, you don't get it in music which uses Pythagorean scales. And at a very early age I realised I was a beneficiary of 2,500 years of culture through the English literature that I studied at university, through the philosophy and through music counterpoint. And I didn't learn any of that as a science student, and I think I had an outstandingly good education because of that.
I had not expected that digression, Ian. Tell me, where did you study?
This was at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, and it was a technological university, and they wanted their students to not only study the mathematics and the science, but they wanted them to have a little bit more breadth. And it was a wonderful.
I'm actually, my jaw is hitting the floor here that such a course could have existed. That sounds like it would be the envy of. Well, it wouldn't be the envy, of course, because they've all rejected that now. But this is the sort of thing that ought to be taught at our very best universities. That breadth.
Yes, and I would argue that one of the reasons why we have many of these modern isms is that we've had a breakdown of the education system. We've had such a dumbing down of the education system that we get taught a sequence of facts, and if you ask a really simple question, people firstly don't know how to argue, and secondly they don't know how to construct an argument, and they don't think that facts have to be validated and repeated before you can use them in an argument.
Can you just tell me what is counterpoint exactly? Is it the bass lines on Bach and things like that?
It's a bit more complicated than that. Counterpoint is where you can have maybe a voice and two or three musical instruments playing, excuse me, I'm dying, playing in a different key and playing different notes, and you layer it and put it together and you get harmony. Now that arose from church music. We have a lot to thank the churches for. They have given us a lot of music, and very different music from what we get in Islam or Shinto or other religions. And that church music has underpinned a lot of the way we have become civilised as a society. And I think many other religions have yet to become a civilising force.
You know, most students now going to even our best universities, certainly in Britain, I don't know about in the US, but I'm guessing Australia, do not know the basic stories of the Bible anymore.
No, of course not. And one of the most impressive things about the Bible is the language that was used. And I would argue that the Bible is a document that has stood the test of time. The King James edition was actually a translation by a committee, and I can think it's the only committee in the world that's ever done anything that stood the test of time.
Well, I suppose you could. Maybe the founding fathers.
Well, very much so, yes.
I think that they'd be the other committee.
I stand corrected.
Yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I'm a bit croaky. That's because I have a big night. Every time I drink bucket loads, I get very croaky.
You're a globetrotter. You travel so. I mean, I suppose living on the other side of the world, you have to. Otherwise, you're out of the loop altogether. But
yes, but I have a great moral cause also. I like putting plant food into the atmosphere. It has greened the planet. It allows us to be eat and drink and live. And if we were not putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, where it only stays for 5 years or so, then we wouldn't be doing our bit to green this planet and to enrich the environment.
So you flew over from your home in South Australia, which we're going to talk about a bit later on, because South Australia is now the epicenter of green stupid, is it not?
Certainly.
You flew over to address the House of Lords.
Among other things, yes, and that was related to my latest book, which has got many South Australian examples.
Plug it now, mate.
And the book is called Climate Delusion and the Great Electricity Rip-Off. And in essence, the theme is very, very simple. You couldn't make this up if you tried. Here we have Australia as the biggest energy exporter in the world. We export 450 million tonnes a year of coal to Asia, so they can put it in their coal-fired power stations and their coking coal to make steel. We export huge amounts of liquefied natural gas. We're the third biggest in the world. We're the second biggest exporter in the world of uranium. Yet we have fuel poverty. Yet the lights go out. Pensioners can't afford to heat their houses. They can't afford to have their electricity bills paid. Here we are as an incredibly wealthy, energy-rich country, and we've kicked this wonderful own goal where we don't have electricity. Now, I live in South Australia, which is it's a very small state. We've only got 1.7 million people, and it likes to be first at something. Well, it is. It has the most expensive electricity in the world, and they're trying to run an industrial economy off sea breezes and sunbeams. The two coal-fired power stations that used to keep the industrial economy going were closed down because you can't compete against the massive subsidies. And remember that a wind turbine doesn't harvest the wind, it harvests subsidies. And so what happened is they dynamited these two power stations and wonder why they've got power shortages, wonder why the whole system falls apart. Now, they did that because of emissions, these emissions. And so they've decided to put batteries into South Australia, and these are batteries sold to them by this chap who sounds like a deodorant. And
Elon Musk, yes.
That's the one. $150 million for batteries. And you can do the sums. If the power goes off, we in South Australia have 4.5 minutes of battery power, just enough to make a cup of tea, and then you sit and drink it in the dark. But that's suddenly been realised that that's not going to work. So then they put in diesel generators, only $100 million worth of diesel generators. Remember, the state is bankrupt. And these diesel generators are pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, I thought that was the exact aim of having wind and solar. So we have collectively gone mad, and I'm arguing this is like the Dutch tulip mania, where collectively everyone goes mad, then collectively everyone goes broke.
The diesel generators must be about the most eco-unfriendly way of producing power.
Well, yes and no. I have one in my house for the reason that I cannot trust a reliable energy system, so I've got a 7.5 kVA generator, and a lot of people are doing this. They certainly are very expensive. They're not ecologically friendly, but I'm not arguing that wind is ecologically friendly either. I mean, how can you as an environmentalist justify a bird and bat chomping monstrosity that kills off beautiful scenery and leaves contaminants in the soils? How can you support solar power where to create those the solar units you leave all sorts of pollutants in someone else's country? But that doesn't really matter very much because they're Chinese and you just leave it there. So how can you justify that as being ecologically and environmentally friendly? It's not.
Yes,
it's got nothing to do with the environment, and it's got nothing to do with science.
We're now on one of my favourite themes. We're going to continue into the next section. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and very Australian guest, Professor Ian Plimer. More in a moment.
Hey folks, I want to tell you about Breitbart News' Second Amendment newsletter, Downrange with A.W.R. Hawkins. Features the top gun stories of the week, every week, and guest columnists like Gun Owners of America's Larry Pratt or Armed American Radio's Mark Walters. Also features a review of a firearm or a firearm accessory each week. The newsletter downloads on Thursday, comes right to your email inbox. You can subscribe at breitbart.com/AWR.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and very Australian guest, Professor Ian Plimer, author of Climate Change Delusion and the Great electricity rip-off. Now, this is born of very personal experience in his home state of South Australia, where I've been. In fact, I've actually stayed with Ian at his house in Adelaide, which is notable for at least two things. One, it's got a famous cricket ground called the
Adelaide Cricket Ground.
Hasn't it got a name?
And there's a Poms Australia test starting in a couple of days' time.
Oh, and you're going to thrash us, aren't you, I've heard?
Well, I don't know about that.
No, I have heard that. We beat you at the rugby. Not my American listener. I do have a special American listener. Not that he, she, I don't want to assume his gender, would care about cricket. But yeah, so you're going to thrash us at cricket. But the other thing I noticed about Adelaide, you've got some really good beer.
Beer, wineries, it's the city of churches. It was basically a refugee town from Prussian imperialism, so there's a big German link there.
Oh, right.
It's a small town, and South Australia is a desert state. It was settled by free settlers, so why on earth free settlers would settle a desert is beyond me. It was once owned by a private company, then it had a governor, then it had a parliament. It was the first state in Australia where Aboriginals, men and women, had a vote. So it was
quite progressive.
It was quite progressive.
In the good sense of the word.
In the good sense of the word, not in the current political sense of the word, where I think a better word is retrogressive.
So what happened to your state? Because you've got a Labour government, which is really quite socialistic green lunacy, isn't it? How did they get in?
What happened to South Australia was 60 or 70 years ago, we had a system where every state in Australia generated its own electricity and it had its own grid. And they were able to reduce the costs of electricity and competed against each other for business. So South Australia was saying, well, come to South Australia, we've got the cheapest electricity. And a motor vehicle industry was set up, half a dozen manufacturers operated there, white goods industry, a lot of manufacturers. And then we had the federal government in the mid-90s say, oh no, we're going to control electricity in southeastern Australia. And they set up a national electricity market, and as soon as they did that, the price took off. And then with wind and solar feeding into the grid, the price took off even more and the grid became more unstable. And South Australia now has the most expensive electricity in the world. It wanted to be first at something. Well, that's what it's got. It's more expensive than Denmark, more expensive than Germany. 48% of its electricity comes from sea breezes, and at this time of the year, we don't get wind. So we have very little power during summertime.
Right. You've got some quite big industry, haven't you? And BHP, is that
BHP built and run the Olympic Dam uranium mine.
So that requires quite a bit of energy, doesn't it?
That requires a huge amount of energy. We are exporting 8,000 tonnes of uranium in yellow cake every year. We're the only G20 country without nuclear power. This is just madness. And yet we've got a power shortage in a country that's blessed with power.
How come? If I were chairman of, or whatever, what would it be, CEO of Broken Hill Proprietors, BHP Billiton, which is a big serious internationally quoted company, I would be thinking of, well, I don't know what, making my displeasure known to the state government. Why is this not happening?
Well, they lost hundreds of millions when we had a power blackout because their smelters and mines had to close. You can't operate a mine when you've got no fresh air being pumped down there, and you use that from the electrical grid. You cannot pump out the mine of water if you don't have electricity. You cannot melt the rock to take out the copper and uranium unless you have electricity. That mine lost hundreds of millions because of the total absolute incompetence of the South Australian government.
Can they not sue the?
Well, I don't know what deals have been done behind the scenes, but this is absolutely bizarre. We are an energy-rich country, yet we have power failures, we have brownouts, we have blackouts, and we have the most expensive energy in the world.
How many blackouts have you had?
They're rolling blackouts, so you might have 90,000 people affected in one area by a blackout, and a little bit later someone else. We've had a total blackout of all of South Australia. And
so 1.7 million people
1.7 million ping without power. But
how long?
We have rolling, it was just over a day, and we have rolling blackouts also. And I think this is the end result of having renewable energy, which I call in my book ruinable energy, because that's what it is. And this is not alternative energy, it is an alternative to energy. So here we are, apparently reducing our emissions. Now, in my book, I go back to an absolute fundamental, and that is that no one has ever shown that the human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming. No one has ever shown that we sinful humans drive global warming, and everything is built on emissions. And if you haven't shown that, then the whole process that we're going through now is based on a fallacy.
Yes. When I say that to people, to true believers, they look at me like, this can't be true. How could this massive industry be predicated on something that has not been proven scientifically ever at all? But it's true, isn't it?
Because there's a huge number of carpetbaggers in there, banks, institutions, power companies, making huge amounts of money out of subsidies, and making huge amounts of money of transferring carbon credits around the world. This has got nothing to do with science. It's got nothing to do with politics. It's to do with control of people by unelected thugs around the world who are trying to decarbonise our society such that they can control us.
But just going back a second, because I've got you, because you actually are from South Australia. You voted for what's his name, the guy in charge?
Jay Weatherill is the current Premier. The previous Premier was also very green, and we have an opposition that's so pathetically weak.
A bit like our current Conservatives in the UK.
Oh, very much so. Terribly weak opposition that I think it will be business as usual.
But why can South Australia not vote this guy out? I mean, surely he's going to be punished for this at the ballot box.
I suspect with an election in March 2018 that might happen, but it's a case of twiddle-dee and twiddle-dum.
So you mean that the opposition are nearly as green as...
Yes. And why should you in a Conservative opposition be green at all? Because they're never going to vote for you. Why not be pragmatic?
I've often said this to some of my Conservative friends. You're listening, Michael Gove. Look, these people are always going to hate you. So why pay lip service to their drivel? It's never going to work. But in parallel with your book, I've been reading another book. I don't know whether you've ever come across Vox Day. He wrote a book. His latest book is called Social Justice Warriors. The first one was called Social Justice Warriors Always Lie, and the second one is called Social Justice Warriors Always Double Down. And in chapter 2 or 3, there's a message of hope, which is 2015 was the worst year ever for the best year ever for the social justice warriors. It seemed that they were going to win everything. They were going to rule the world. But then 2016, there was the glorious Trump backlash, whereas people like you and me, well, not that we had the vote, but we would have done had we been in America, voted in Trump, who is the king of the resistance, the leader of the resistance to the SJWs. I'm hoping that something similar is going to happen in the whole climate change scam. Are you seeing any evidence of that in Australia? I mean, surely, given how royally screwed your country has been by the eco-Nazis, surely there must be... I mean, look, you're tough guys. You went and carved this country out of nothing, pretty much. This continent of just red rock and Aborigines.
Well, you've been there. I've shown you around parts of Australia.
We've been to the outback.
I don't think this has got anything to do with science. I think it's always going to be the bottom line. Now, my wife and I rattle around in a house. We close it off, most of it off in winter. Our electricity bill for the September quarter in 2017 was, you tell me what it was.
For the quarter?
For the quarter, for two people in a house that's closed off.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing it ought to be about maximum $250.
$3,133 for two people in a house where we've closed off most of it over winter. Now that's going to drive the change. That the costs are horrendous. No pensioner could pay that. No person on an average wage can pay it. And I think we are going to have quite a rapid change when those electricity costs translate as businesses closing down, people losing their jobs, people dying on the operating table. No one cares if someone my age dies, but if you get children dying on an operating table when there's no electricity, then you have a political crisis. And all of a sudden, our great leaders, who are really followers, will instantaneously change their view, but they will never ever say, I'm sorry folks, we were wrong.
You've got a Prime Minister at the moment who is a liberal, which is the Australian word for conservative, but he's not really, is he?
No, he's a liberal in the US sense.
Yes.
We don't have a Conservative Party. We have conservative individuals and a few breakaway groups. And I've just spent time travelling through Queensland, which is a very different part of the world. It's the Texas of Australia. And it is full of angry people. They are angry. They are not being listened to. Their costs have risen. Unemployment is rising. And these people are not being listened to. And we find in federal politics, which is in this artificial town called Canberra, these people don't get out and talk to people. They don't get involved in pub talk where they listen to the average person out there. We have advisors who are brilliantly wise 23-year-olds who have done nothing in their lives. These people are not listening to the jungle drums, and the jungle drums are people are very, very angry. They are not being listened to. Their cost has gone up. Employment is now being threatened because of the high cost of energy, and some of these wealth-producing industries will close or will move somewhere else.
Well, surely one of the great advantages of a federal system, as we've seen in the US, for example, is that states can compete against one another, as you mentioned Australia used to, for business. So you've got Texas, which is, well, actually Texas isn't perfect because of its obsession with wind turbines, but you've got states like Texas which are low tax and attract entrepreneurs and labour, and then you've got places like California which are completely screwed because they're high tax zones. Is there not anywhere in Australia which is offering a beacon of hope, an alternative energy system, well, one that works?
We've had the federal government in Australia increasingly put its nose into state government activities.
Right.
And the states have less power than they had years ago, and they're involved in duplication of many of the federal services that are provided. I think the state that probably offers the most hope is Queensland, because there's some 300 million tonnes a year of coal that's exported from Queensland. More Queenslanders live out of cities than in any other state in Australia, and don't be deluded. Australians don't live in the bush. They live in cities, and it's only in Queensland where people actually live out in the bush. Most of Australia has very few people, very few services, and pretty poor infrastructure, and so it's a city people who are blessed with this wonderful ignorance where they flick a switch and that gives them electricity, where they go into the supermarket and they get their food. We have 13 days of diesel in Australia. If for some reason the supply routes were closed and we don't create diesel in Australia, we buy it from abroad, then people in the cities would not be fed because we have trucks running on diesel bringing this fuel into the cities. So we are very fragile, and it's the Queenslanders who understand this. Most of the other people in Australia live in cities and don't know where their food comes from, don't know where their energy comes from, and they don't know where all the other commodities they use come from.
This was one of the real eye-openers for me when I went on my tour of Australia a few years ago, which you helped out in. Oh my God, the trip you arranged for me in the bush helicopter over the... What was
checking out the crocodiles,
checking
very,
out the
very close up.
What's his name? The
Bungie was the
Bungie.
pilot.
Ian fixed for me to go out in a two-seater helicopter.
A Robertson R22.
With the guy who... They herd cattle with helicopters
yes,
because the farms are so big. That's the only way.
And if something goes wrong, you don't even get time to kiss your ass goodbye. It's just, that's it.
And so he took me out over the Queensland jungle and over a river, and we saw a saltwater crocodile that must have been about 30 feet long. I mean, they're huge, these bastards, and my God, they're dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And he buzzed the crocodile so that the skid on his helicopter was almost touching the... It's just amazing.
Well, you asked me. You wanted to see a crocodile close up, and I arranged the trip for you.
You've certainly arranged it. And you also showed me the bush. You took me out to one of your favourite spots, Chillago. which is right in the outback, isn't it?
Yes,
in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
One of those, and the centre of this settlement, or whatever you'd call it. I mean, it's not a town, is it?
No, it's a pub.
It's a pub, yeah, exactly.
And I note that you could never remember leaving the pub, so you obviously had a good time.
It was a great place. But the big eye-opener for me going to Australia was realising that actually Australian lefties are probably more virulent and limp-wristed and right on and just generally ghastly than lefties I've met almost anywhere in the world. Why is that?
Life's too easy. We're a wealthy country. People don't have to bend their back. In 1942 we had a Prime Minister that spoke about lifters and leaners. It's got worse. We've got 50% of the country now net beneficiaries from the welfare system, and those of us that work and pay tax are becoming a endangered species. And we live in cities, and there is the myth out there that Australians are these great bronzed, surfing bush people. That's not true. You take a city person out into the bush, you get frightened of an ant, and they might go...
Well, they're quite nasty ants.
Well, they are indeed, but they might go 300 kilometres inland and think they're in the bush. They're not. On a quiet night, 300 kilometres inland, you can still hear the surf. These people in the cities do not know where their food comes from and how people in rural Australia bust their backs to create food and to try to have a living off land that has a variable rainfall, and the rainfall is small.
Do you know, I was just drifting off there because I suddenly remembered as we were talking about Australia that I was once when I was I think on my gap year or when I was at university maybe, I had this fantastic fling with this girl who worked from the Sydney Morning Herald. I imagine now she wouldn't touch me because she'd known what my politics were.
Well, we call it the Socialist Morning Herald,
so
not the Sydney Morning Herald. It was one of the great newspapers of the world.
Maybe when she shagged me, it was okay.
Yeah, probably. But you might have an Australian child. You never know.
That would be so exciting. Do you know what? I know one shouldn't say this, but I'd actually quite like some illegitimate children lurking around the world. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily likely.
Well, that's why I have a British passport. I have an illegitimate English father.
Is that right? Well, yeah.
First 2 weeks of life was... Where's this interview going anyway?
No.
It's going to places I didn't want it to go to, but he spent his first 2 weeks of life in England, and with mother and son were shipped out to the furthest possible colony, and that was Australia. And I don't know whether he was shipped out because he was illegitimate or because his father was a Scotsman. It's probably both.
Well, there we... You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special, very Australian, very naughty guest, Professor Ian Plimer.
Sonny Johnson brings her cutting-edge conservative commentary to SiriusXM Patriot every week on Sonny's Corner.
So there's one simple rule that I follow. You should always protect and defend ideas and principles, not people. People will let you down. Your ideas and your principles will keep you steady through any storms.
Sonny's Corner, every Saturday at noon East on Breitbart News Saturday. SiriusXM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special, very Australian, very naughty guest, Professor Ian Plimer. I always like it when I've got it's a bit like when you go to a party and you meet a doctor, and instantly you have to ask the doctor, look, doctor, I've got this problem that I want to show you. You know, would you mind having a quick look just in case it's got willy cancer or whatever? Yeah. And in the same way, when I've got an actual scientist with me, I want to ask them key questions about some of the things that mystify me, like solar energy. I talk to some people who say, oh yeah, no, solar's great, solar's the future, and it's really, the moment is almost coming very soon now where solar will just pay for itself, won't need any subsidies. You know, you might diss wind farms, they say, but don't knock solar. Solar is the future. What is your answer to that?
Life on Earth is here because of the sun. Climate's changed because of the sun. Former civilisations worshipping the sun probably had it right. We are here because of the sun. However, the energy that the sun gives out is right across a spectrum of wavelengths, and we live or die on the sun. It's not a constant amount of energy the sun gives out. It's a variable amount, which is one of the major factors driving climate change. It's been a wish for a long time for people to harness solar energy. However, if we use a silicon wafer and solar energy hits that wafer, electrons in the silicon jump one level, and when they jump back again, they give out electricity. That's in response to only one wavelength of all of the whole spectrum of solar energy. Now, you can't change that. You can't change the laws of physics. However, the fiendishly cunning Spanish have been able to do this. They have been able to change the laws of physics for solar energy. And you heard it here first, folks. They've been able to generate solar power at night. Now, you heard that correctly. It's not an Australian accent. The Spanish can generate solar electricity at night. And I'm going to let you into the secret. This is the way they do it. They have a diesel generator, floodlights, and they illuminate the solar panels because the subsidies are so generous, they actually make money at night from this solar array. No wonder Spain went broke. Now, that is solar power.
Do they? I thought Abengoa. Is it Abengoa, the Spanish solar company? I thought the government had kind of reined in all those subsidies for renewables.
They have now.
They have now.
Wind power runs on subsidies, not the wind.
Yeah.
Solar power runs on subsidies, not one wavelength,
And
one specific wavelength coming from the sun.
So there's nothing that the industry can do to change the physics.
There is. There are other materials that will also give out electricity when you hit it with sunlight, and an electron jumps a shell and then jumps back and gives out electricity. And these are commodities like gallium or germanium or indium. Gallium is interesting because gallium is chemically very similar to aluminium, and if you're to produce gallium, you actually have to mine a lot more bauxite, produce a lot more aluminium oxide from which you extract the gallium, and then produce an enormous amount of aluminium metal, which has a huge amount of embedded energy. So to get a more efficient way of solar power, you actually have to use bucket loads of energy to make excess aluminium to create another component.
When you say aluminium has lots of embedded energy, does that mean it takes a lot of energy to produce the aluminium?
Produce it, yes.
Okay.
And the same as zinc. If you're producing zinc, there's a lot of embedded energy in zinc, and a byproduct from making zinc is actually germanium. Now, germanium has also these photoelectric qualities. So if you want to not use silicon cells and use gallium, germanium or indium, we don't have enough on the earth. We haven't found it yet. And we would have to have smelters about 100 times more powerful than now, and putting out 100 times more zinc and aluminium than now. Now, we've got plenty of aluminium on Earth. We don't have much zinc. There's quite a crisis in the amount of zinc. So we can't go to another metal.
Can we not just mine these things?
Well, there is no germanium mine in the world. There is no gallium mine in the world. There's no indium mine in the world. They are byproducts from gallium, aluminium, germanium, zinc, and indium from tin. So we don't have this material on Earth to be able to create the more efficient solar power.
What about the other method where they focus the sun's rays and heat salt or something?
That's wonderful. Yes, all the birds love that, and they fly into this beam and get fried mid-air and just drop out of the sky. That's an inefficient process, solar thermal, because you lose heat very quickly. It does generate electricity, and it does work as a very short-term battery. I would have thought that the best ways of generating electricity are the ways we know are efficient. Now, photovoltaics was invented in 1839. If it actually worked, we would be running industrial economies off it. It's been around for a long time. We don't. We still run industrial economies off steam engines. So don't give me this crap about old technology. Steam engines are pretty old. A wheel's even older. If you don't like old technology, then don't use anything with a wheel in it.
Yes.
So we generate steam from burning coal or from having the breakdown of heavy atoms, giving us nuclear fission, and that steam drives a turbine which spins a magnet which creates electricity. So the old ways are the best ways because they have what is called energy density. And we have a huge amount of energy density in uranium. We have energy density in coal and in oil and in gas. But the slight movement of the tides or the slight movement of the wind or one wavelength of solar, that is not energy density. It's not enough to run an industrial economy. However, in Australia, we do have some very good cases for solar. For example, a phone box in the middle of nowhere, you run it off solar power. Signals for the transcontinental railway lines in the middle of nowhere, you run those train signals off solar. That's a very, very efficient use of energy because you don't have to continue to go out there and maintain them. Many outback stations, or the Americans call them ranches, have wind power and also solar power. You need that. There's no grid. You're in the middle of nowhere. So there is an argument for using these highly inefficient forms of energy generation in isolated areas. But you cannot run an urban society or an industrial society on sea breezes and sunbeams. We still have very good ways of running society, and that's where we have energy density.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty much the entire reason the Industrial Revolution was possible was because of energy density.
Well, let me give you some bad news.
Yeah.
If there wasn't an Industrial Revolution, you would still have been a peasant. And I can see peasant characteristics in you. We did have the filthy rich and the peasants.
Yeah.
And the Industrial Revolution, driven by coal, allowed people to come into the middle class. And the middle class is because of coal. We are seeing the same happening in China and in India. And for environmentalists in Australia to object to coal export to China is appalling. These people are saying, I'm happy to take the benefits of the Industrial Revolution and live a comfortable middle class life and to be judgmental about others, but I'm not going to let the Chinese or Indians do this. That is appalling hypocrisy, and this is the environmental movement to a T. They are anti-human, and they want to take the benefits of thousands of years of Western civilization and hundreds of years since the Industrial Revolution and not allow anyone else to have those benefits.
You're right. There is a snobbery and elitism at the heart of the environmental movement, and you see it in the writers of the 1950s, the kind of eugenicists who and environmentalists who were championed by people like Al Gore. And they despise...
Remind me again, that's the chap who's telling us about sea level rise yet owns a waterfront property. Is that the Al Gore you're talking about?
And funnily enough, who's your Australian?
Flim Flannery.
Flannery?
Yes.
Hasn't
Tim
he
Flannery.
bought waterside property?
Yes, he's got waterside properties too, and is telling us that sea level's going to rise and we're all going to fry and die. He's cost our country billions because he said we're going to run out of water. Well, we are a water poor country, which is the cap to having massive immigration. And so we built all these desalination plants in Australia. Not one of them has fired a shot in anger. That's cost us tens of billions due to someone who's an expert in tree kangaroos telling us that we are going to run out of water.
So
collective madness.
I think, as you've fairly convincingly demonstrated, you're not a bad communicator. So maybe you can answer me a question. Why is it that so many people, given that the facts are out there, why do so many people believe all this nonsense?
That's a complicated question. You've used the word believe, and that is a word of religion and politics. It's not a word of science. It is the new puritanical religion amongst the Western world. And as part of the evolution of the Western world, we are ignoring the logic that we had in Aristotle's time. We're ignoring the basis of science, which the Greeks invented. We're ignoring the basis of written law, Justinian law. We're ignoring thousands of years of evolution of thought. We are now throwing out 2,000 years of the evolution of Christianity and are developing a new puritanical fundamentalist religion where we do not allow anyone to have a different view, and we can do that because we're wealthy. I travel the world a lot. I work in a lot of third world countries, and what you see in third world countries is you don't see demonstrations of people being very wealthy, such as graffiti or such as tattoos. People are concerned with their own culture and concerned with survival. So we, I think, have got to the pinnacle of evolution of Western civilization where we're so wealthy we are destroying it, and this is linked in with the dumbing down of the education system, and it's linked in with the hangover from Christianity where we have to buy indulgences, which is wind and solar. We can see these indulgences. We have to have guilt about something.
Yeah.
Now, I've done some pretty terrible things in my life, but I don't feel guilty. That's just part of the passage of life. And we have this puritanical movement, which we've seen before in the history of time, and this has turned into a political movement which is now manipulating people's everyday life, such as the cost of electricity.
Do you know what?
That was the answer. I've forgotten your question.
It was a good answer. I want you to tell me the story, if you're up for it, of the time on your aeroplane when. Go on, tell the story.
Well, that was an interesting phase of life. I was a passenger on a corporate jet, single pilot, and there were 9 consecutive errors that were made. After the 8th error was made, there was no hope, and we ran out of fuel at 31,000 feet, and we crashed in the bush.
How did you know? When did you know that your aircraft had run out of fuel?
When there was a noise that I will never forget, and that's a jet engine flaming out, and then I heard the other one on the other side flame out, and all of a sudden everything's silent. Jet aeroplanes don't glide; they drop like a brick, and I thought, oh shit, well, this is going to be skid marks in the desert. This is the way I'm going to go.
And how many of you were on the plane?
There were 6 on board, and this was basically based on criminal negligence. And so for listeners, never fly in a single pilot jet. Make sure that the pilot doesn't have any Phillips head screws bouncing around in his head. We clipped the trees on the way in, and there was a clearing that had been cut by the ranch owner, the property owner, and he'd cut a fire break in there.
That would be illegal now.
Of course it would be. And we hit this clearing, and the noise of the fuselage against the dirt and hitting saplings was a noise I'll never forget, and we'd slowed down enough before we started to clip some trees. Now, this chap who owns that property is a chap called John Jones at Bulong, east of Kalgoorlie. I know him, and every time he sees me, he says, oh, by the way, you haven't paid me for parking your aeroplane on my property. And I reply, and by the way, you haven't paid me for the ploughing. And we ploughed a 400-metre trench when this plane hit. Now, that was a formative part of my life, because I then moved from working in that particular sphere into the academic world. I'd had an offer from a university, and I thought, well, maybe it's time to work in the university for a while and not flit around in private jets.
Did it have, I'd love to know what thoughts, you presumably must have been aware that jets are not designed to...
Oh, very much so. I do a lot of flying, and I did in the past. They glide like a brick. There's no flaps. You can't get the undercarriage down.
So you must have known...
Oh, I knew I was dead.
Yeah.
And I was very, very angry that criminal negligence had put me into this situation with an irresponsible pilot. I had no thoughts of the afterlife or anything like this.
You didn't start making pacts with God or anything like that.
No. I don't do those sort of deals. And
no. and so was it an experience that, apart from your move to academe, was it an experience that changed you at all, changed your view of the world or anything?
It changed my view of dealing with idiots, and about 90% of people around this world are incompetent, and there's a lot of idiots amongst them. So don't put your life in the hand of an idiot. Focus on safety all the time. I do a lot of flying. The most dangerous thing about flying is driving to the airport and back, especially with taxi drivers, not so much in the UK but in other parts of the world, and to focus on people being responsible for their actions. And this is one of the reasons I'm very hostile to the Green Movement, because they are not responsible for the actions that impoverish people and actually kill people, and they abrogate all responsibility. So it did focus my mind on safety, on responsibility, and on dealing with total, absolute fuckwits.
That's too good a point not to end on. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special, very Australian and very wonderful guest, Professor Ian Plimer, author of, one more time, Climate Change Delusion and the Great Electricity Ripoff. As you can imagine, he doesn't pull his punches, he never does. Thank you, and goodbye.